The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock, embossed with gold lettering that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Join us for an evening of celebration at Le Bernardin, 7 p.m. sharp. Formal attire required. It was signed by my stepmother, Victoria, in her characteristic looping script that somehow managed to look both elegant and condescending. I should have known something was wrong. The Ashfords didn't do family dinners. We did obligatory holiday gatherings where everyone smiled through gritted teeth and counted the minutes until they could leave. An impromptu dinner at one of Manhattan's most expensive restaurants? That wasn't celebration. That was theater. But I went anyway because despite everything, some pathetic part of me still hoped. Hoped that maybe, just maybe, according to YouTube analytics, 99.6% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. They'd finally see me as one of them. That my father would look at me the way he looked at my half-siblings, Marcus and Celeste, with pride instead of thinly veiled disappointment. I'd been foolish before. This time, I was about to be a fool on a stage. I arrived at Le Bernardin 15 minutes early, my palms sweating inside my only decent suit, a navy blue number I'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago. The maitre d' guided me to a private dining room, and my stomach dropped when I saw how many people were there. This wasn't a family dinner. This was an audience. My father, Richard Ashford III, sat at the head of an extended table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression unreadable behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Victoria perched beside him like an elegant bird of prey in a dress that probably cost more than my car. Marcus lounged in his chair with that infuriating smirk he'd perfected at boarding school, while Celeste examined her manicure with studied disinterest. But they weren't alone. Uncle Theodore was there, along with Aunt Patricia and her husband. The family attorney, Mr. Pemberton, sat stiffly in the corner with his briefcase. Even Grandmother Ashford had been wheeled in, her roomy eyes fixing on me with something between pity and disgust. "Ah, James," my father said, his voice carrying that particular tone he reserved for discussing stock portfolios and disappointing investments. "You're here. Please, sit." The only empty chair was at the opposite end of the table from him, isolated on display. I sat down, my throat tight. A waiter materialized with champagne for everyone except me. I got water. "I suppose you're wondering why we've gathered," Victoria said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Richard and I thought it was important to bring the family together for this momentous announcement." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Oh, this is going to be good." My father cleared his throat. "James, you're 28 years old now. Your mother passed away when you were 10, and I've done my best to provide for you since then." "Your best," Victoria interjected sweetly. "Within reason." I felt my face flush. Within reason. That's what they called the state school instead of the Ivy League. The shared apartment in Queens instead of the Upper East Side penthouse. The job hunt they never helped with while Marcus got handed a VP position at the family company. "Dad, what's this about?" I managed to ask. He pulled out a document, and Mr. Pemberton stood up, suddenly looking like a man who wished he were anywhere else. "James, I need you to understand something," my father continued. "Family legacy is important. The Ashford name means something. It represents generations of hard work, careful stewardship, and proper breeding. Proper breeding. Like I was a dog that didn't meet Kennel Club standards. Your mother—" He paused, and for a moment, I thought I saw something human flicker across his face. But then Victoria placed her hand over his, and whatever warmth had been there vanished. "Your mother was a lovely woman, but she didn't come from our world, and I'm afraid that's reflected in you." The room went silent except for the soft clink of Celeste's bracelet as she raised her champagne glass to her lips. "What Dad is trying to say," Marcus cut in, clearly enjoying himself, "is that you've always been a bit of an embarrassment. The community college attendance, the middle management job at that sad little marketing firm, the studio apartment in— where is it again? Queens?" "Forest Hills," I whispered. "Right, Forest Hills." He said it like it was a leper colony. "The point is, you don't fit. You never have." My father straightened his shoulders. "I've made arrangements for you to receive a one-time payment of $50,000. That's more than generous considering—" "Considering what?" The words came out harder than I intended. "Considering you're not actually contributing to the family legacy," Victoria said, her eyes glittering. "Celeste is marrying the Rothschild heir. Marcus is tripling our quarterly earnings. What have you done, James? What have you contributed except to drain resources that could be better utilized elsewhere?" "The family estate," my father continued as if she hadn't spoken, "will be divided between Marcus and Celeste upon my passing. The trust funds, the properties, the company shares, all of it. Mr. Pemberton has drawn up the papers. You'll sign them tonight, acknowledging that you have no claim to the Ashford inheritance beyond the settlement we're offering." I couldn't breathe. The room spun. "You invited me here to humiliate me?" I finally managed. "You couldn't have done this privately? You needed an audience?" "We wanted there to be witnesses," Victoria said smoothly, "so there would be no confusion later, no unfortunate attempts to contest the will." Grandmother Ashford spoke for the first time, her voice a dry rasp. "Sign the papers, boy. Take your money and disappear. You've always been an embarrassment to this family." Something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. And through that, crack. Something cold and clear began to seep in. I looked around the table at their faces. The contempt, the satisfaction, the casual cruelty of people who'd never faced consequences for anything in their entitled lives. "You know what?" I said, standing up. "You're right." That surprised them. Victoria's eyebrows rose. "I have been an embarrassment, because I actually believed that family meant something, that blood meant something, that maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough, if I was good enough, you'd see me as one of you." I laughed, and it sounded bitter even to my own ears. "But you never will you? Because this isn't about what I've done or haven't done. This is about who my mother was. A kindergarten teacher from Brooklyn who dared to fall in love with a man above her station." "James," my father started. "I'm not finished." My voice was steady now, clear. "You want me to sign away my inheritance? Fine. But I'm not signing anything tonight. I'm going to take some time to think about it, to consider whether $50,000 is adequate compensation for a lifetime of being treated like garbage by the people who were supposed to love me." "The offer expires tonight," Mr. Pemberton said nervously. "Then I guess it expires." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "Enjoy your dinner. I hope the caviar tastes extra good tonight, knowing you've got one less mouth to feed." I left them sitting there in stunned silence, and it wasn't until I was 3 blocks away, standing on a street corner in the cold Manhattan night, that I started shaking. The next week was a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the dinner in my mind, seeing their faces, hearing their casual cruelty. But I also started remembering other things. Things I'd buried or explained away over the years. I remembered being 13 and overhearing Victoria tell my father that I was dragging down the family reputation at the country club. I remembered Marcus pushing me into the pool at his 16th birthday party while everyone laughed. I remembered Celeste telling her friends I was technically family, but not really, when I was 17. And I remembered my mother. The way she'd held me after my first day at the private school my father insisted I attend, where the other kids had mocked my secondhand blazer. "You're worth 10 of them," she'd whispered. "Don't ever forget that." I'd forgotten. Somewhere along the way, I'd started believing them instead of her. That needed to change. I started making calls. The first was to my mother's brother, Uncle Frank, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. The Ashfords had made it clear he wasn't welcome at family functions. Too working class, they said. Too loud. Too Brooklyn. "Jamie?" His voice was warm, surprised. "Kid, is that you? Jesus, it's been forever." We talked for 3 hours. He told me things about my mother I'd never known, how she'd kept journals, how she'd been documenting her relationship with my father, including some very interesting financial arrangements he'd made that might not have been entirely legal, how she'd left those journals with Uncle Frank for safekeeping, making him promise to give them to me when I was ready. "She knew, Jamie," Uncle Frank said quietly. "She knew what kind of man your father really was, and she wanted you to know the truth someday." "I think I'm ready now," I said. The journals were revelatory. My mother hadn't been the simple kindergarten teacher the Ashfords painted her as. She'd been sharp, observant, and she'd been keeping track. Tax evasion schemes, fraudulent charity donations, bribes to city officials. My father's carefully constructed image of the upstanding businessman was built on a foundation of corruption, and my mother had documented every crack. But that wasn't all. The journals also revealed something that made my blood run cold. My mother hadn't died from a sudden heart condition, as I'd been told. She'd been planning to leave my father, to expose him, to take me and start over. And then, 3 days before she was supposed to meet with a lawyer, she'd collapsed at home. The coroner had ruled it natural causes, but my mother had written about feeling increasingly ill in the weeks before her death, about drinks that tasted strange, about Victoria's sudden friendliness, the gifts of tea and homemade meals. I couldn't prove anything, not after 18 years. But I didn't need to prove it in court. I needed to make them feel what I'd felt: the betrayal, the humiliation, the powerlessness. I spent the next month working in absolute secrecy. I took a leave of absence from my job, telling them I had a family emergency. I cashed out my modest savings, and I started building my case. First, I made copies of everything in my mother's journals and stored them in multiple secure locations. Then I hired a forensic accountant, a former FBI investigator who'd gone private and had a reputation for being both brilliant and discreet. His name was David Chen, and within 2 weeks he'd traced the journal entries to current financial records, building a comprehensive picture of the Ashford family's criminal activities. "This is extensive," David said during one of our meetings, his expression grim. "Tax evasion, securities fraud, money laundering through the family foundation. Your father could go to prison for this. They all could." "Not yet," I said. "I need to do this right." Next, I reached out to a journalist I'd gone to college with, Sarah Martinez. She'd become an investigative reporter for the New York Times, and she'd built her career on exposing wealthy criminals who thought they were untouchable. "James Ashford," she said when I called. "I remember you. Quiet guy, kept to himself. I always wondered why you seemed so separate from all those rich kids." "Now you know," I said. "Sarah, I have a story for you, but I need you to hold it until I say. Can you do that?" "Depends on the story." I laid it all out for her. Everything. She was silent for a long time after I finished. "Jesus, James, this is Pulitzer-level stuff, but why wait? Why not publish now?" "Because I need them to feel safe first," I said. "I need them to think they've won." The final piece of my plan was perhaps the most satisfying. I called Mr. Pemberton, the family attorney. "Mr. Pemberton, this is James Ashford. I'd like to schedule a meeting. I've reconsidered my father's offer. I could practically hear his relief through the phone. Excellent, James. I'm so glad you've come to your senses. Shall we say Thursday at my office? Actually, I'd prefer to do it as a family, the same way they announced it to me. Le Bernardin, private dining room, my treat this time. There was a pause. I'll arrange it. I spent $5,000 on that dinner, 10% of my settlement before I'd even received it. But it was worth every penny. I arrived early again, but this time I wasn't nervous. I was calm, clear, ready. I'd had the restaurant set up the room exactly how I wanted it. A large screen at one end, a podium at the other. Place settings for everyone who'd been at the first dinner, plus a few extras. The Ashfords arrived fashionably late, Victoria sweeping in like she owned the place. "Well," she said, looking around with approval, "I see you've finally learned something about presentation. Perhaps there's hope for you yet." My father looked uncomfortable. "James, I appreciate you coming around. This is the right decision." "Oh, I'm not signing anything tonight," I said pleasantly. "I just wanted to return the favor. You invited me to dinner to make an announcement. Now I'm inviting you to dinner to make one of my own." Marcus laughed. "What could you possibly have to announce? That you're moving up from studio to one bedroom?" I smiled. "Please, everyone sit down. Order whatever you want. The champagne is already flowing." They sat, exchanging confused glances. Mr. Pemberton looked particularly nervous. Once everyone had ordered and the first course was being served, I stood up and walked to the podium. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know you're wondering why I've brought you here. You see, 4 weeks ago, you invited me to this very restaurant to humiliate me, to tell me that I wasn't good enough to be an Ashford, that my mother's low breeding had tainted me beyond redemption." "James, really?" Victoria started. "You'll have your turn to speak," I said coldly. "Right now, you're going to listen." I clicked a button and my mother's face appeared on the screen. It was a photo I'd scanned from her journals. Her at 25, laughing, full of life. "This is Emily Russo, my mother, a kindergarten teacher from Brooklyn who made the mistake of falling in love with a man who saw her as a trophy he could discard when he was done with her." I clicked again. Journal entries appeared on the screen. My mother was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. She knew what you were, Dad. She documented it all. Every illegal deal, every fraudulent transaction, every bribe. For years, she watched you build your empire on corruption and lies. My father's face had gone white. "Where did you get those?" "She left them to me. A final gift, you might say. And before you ask, yes, they're all backed up in multiple secure locations. Nothing you can do will make them disappear." I clicked through several more entries, watching their faces as they realized the extent of what my mother had discovered. "But here's the thing that really interests me," I said, bringing up a specific entry from 3 weeks before her death. "My mother was planning to leave you, Dad. She was going to expose everything. And then she died very suddenly, after weeks of mysterious illness. An illness that started right around the time Victoria began her campaign to befriend her." Victoria shot to her feet. "How dare you?" "Sit down," I said, and something in my voice made her obey. "I can't prove you killed her, not after 18 years. But I don't have to. The court of public opinion doesn't require proof beyond a reasonable doubt." I gestured to the back of the room, where Sarah Martinez and her photographer sat, documenting everything. "This is Sarah Martinez from the New York Times. Tomorrow morning, she's publishing a comprehensive exposé on the Ashford family's criminal empire. Tax evasion, fraud, money laundering. It's all there, meticulously documented." "You can't do this," my father said, but his voice was weak. "I already have, but that's not all." I clicked to the next slide. You see, I've also been in contact with the IRS, the SEC, and the FBI. They're very interested in my mother's journals. There are going to be investigations, audits, criminal charges. This will destroy the family, Aunt Patricia gasped. Yes, I said simply. It will, just like you destroyed me, just like you destroyed my mother. Difference is, you deserve it. Celeste was crying now, her perfect makeup running. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Grandmother Ashford just stared at me with something that might have been respect. The Ashford name will be mud by this time tomorrow, I continued. Your social standing will evaporate. Your business relationships will crumble. Everything you've built will come crashing down. You're insane, Victoria hissed. You'll get nothing from this. You're still cut out of the inheritance. I don't want your inheritance, I said. I don't want anything that came from you. I have something better. I clicked to the final slide. It was a picture of a check for $250,000. While you were all celebrating my humiliation, I sold my mother's story. The film rights, the book rights, everything. People love a good revenge tale, and this one's perfect. Poor boy from Brooklyn, raised by a struggling mother, watches her marry into wealth only to be slowly poisoned by the jealous second wife. Years later, he uncovers the truth and brings down an entire corrupt dynasty. I looked at Victoria. The studio is particularly interested in your role. They're thinking of getting Meryl Streep to play you. She's good at playing villains. You vindictive little bastard, Victoria spat. I learned from the best, I replied. Oh, and Dad, about that inheritance you were so worried about me claiming. I've had my own lawyers draw up papers. I'm officially renouncing any claim to the Ashford estate. I don't want it. I don't want anything that has your taint on it. I turned to Mr. Pemberton. The papers are in that envelope on your seat. Everything properly notarized. You can verify them at your leisure. My father slumped in his chair, suddenly looking old. Why? He asked. Why go to all this trouble? Because you needed to know what it feels like, I said softly. To be powerless. To be humiliated in front of everyone who matters to you. To realize that everything you thought was solid is actually built on sand. I gathered my coat and headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you spend every penny of that inheritance on legal fees. I hope Marcus has to get a real job, one where his name doesn't open doors. I hope Celeste's engagement falls apart when the Rothschilds realize what kind of family she comes from. And I hope you, Victoria, spend every day looking over your shoulder, wondering if someone will finally prove what you did to my mother. This isn't over, my father said, but there was no force behind it. Yes, it is. You're done, and I'm free. I walked out of that restaurant and into the cold November night, and for the first time in 18 years, I felt like I could breathe. The fallout was spectacular. Sarah's article ran the next morning, front page above the fold. The Fall of the Ashford Dynasty. How one family built an empire on fraud and corruption. It was devastating, detailed, and most importantly, it was true. By noon, the SEC had frozen the family assets. By evening, criminal charges had been filed. My father, Marcus, and Uncle Theodore were all indicted. Victoria wasn't charged. There wasn't enough evidence for the murder suspicion, but her reputation was destroyed. The society pages that had once fawned over her now dissected every aspect of her rise from middle-class obscurity to Park Avenue prominence. The business collapsed within a week. Clients fled, investors pulled out, and the Ashford name became synonymous with white-collar crime. Celeste's engagement ended exactly as I'd predicted. Marcus filed for bankruptcy. Grandmother Ashford had a stroke, though she survived. And me? I took my $250,000 and started over. I moved to Portland, far from New York and the Ashford shadow. I went back to school, got my MBA, and started my own marketing consultancy. I worked hard, built real relationships, and discovered something surprising. I was good at what I did, really good. Without the weight of the Ashford name and expectations crushing me, I flourished. 3 years after that dinner, my company was doing well enough that I could hire employees. 5 years after, I was financially stable enough to start a foundation in my mother's name, the Emily Russo Foundation, dedicated to helping first-generation college students and children of single parents. I started dating a woman named Rachel, a social worker who thought my story was tragic but also kind of hilarious. "You nuked your entire family," she said over coffee on our third date. "That's some scorched earth policy." "They nuked me first," I pointed out. "Fair enough." We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Seattle. No fancy venue, no society pages, no drama. Just two people who loved each other, surrounded by friends and family who actually cared. Uncle Frank walked me down the aisle, tears streaming down his face. "Your mom would be so proud," he whispered. "Not of the revenge part. She'd probably say that was a bit much, but of who you've become, of the fact that you didn't let them break you." "They tried," I said, "but they failed." I never saw my father again after that night at Le Bernardin. He went to prison for 7 years on fraud charges. Victoria divorced him within 6 months, taking what little remained that the government hadn't seized. She moved to Miami and married a retired orthopedic surgeon. I heard through the grapevine that she's miserable. Marcus eventually got a job as a mid-level manager at a car dealership. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. He'd once mocked my middle management position, and now it was his ceiling, not his floor. Celeste became a yoga instructor in Los Angeles. She actually reached out to me once, a long email apologizing for everything. I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, don't need to be rebuilt. Mr. Pemberton lost his license to practice law for his role in covering up some of the family's activities. Last I heard, he was working as a paralegal in New Jersey. As for me, I occasionally get interviewed about my story. The book came out 2 years after that night, Inheritance of Lies: How I Brought Down a Dynasty, and it did moderately well. The movie is supposedly in development hell, which is fine by me. I got paid either way. People often ask me if I regret it, if I wish I'd just taken the $50,000 and disappeared, avoided all the drama and pain. The answer is no. Not for a second. Because that night at Le Bernardin, the second one, wasn't really about revenge. Or maybe it was, but it was about something more important too. It was about justice for my mother. It was about refusing to be erased. It was about standing up and saying, "You don't get to do this to people. You don't get to destroy someone and walk away without consequences." The Ashfords thought they could humiliate me into silence. They thought that by cutting me out of the inheritance, they were cutting me out of the story. But I was never after their money or their name. I was after something they could never give me anyway: respect, recognition, love. And once I realized that, once I accepted that I would never get those things from them, I was free to take something else instead: their legacy. I burned it to the ground, and I'd do it again. Sometimes, late at night, I think about my mother, about the journals she kept, the evidence she preserved, the gift she left me even though she couldn't have known I'd need it. She'd been protecting me from beyond the grave, giving me the tools I'd need to fight back when the time came. "You're worth 10 of them," she'd told me once. "Don't ever forget that." I never will again, Mom. I never will. Epilogue. Last month, I received a letter. It was from my father, written from the federal prison where he's serving the remainder of his sentence. The letter was long, rambling, full of self-justification and weak apologies. But one line stood out. I see now that you are more of an Ashford than I ever gave you credit for. You have the ruthlessness, the strategic mind, the ability to destroy your enemies completely. Perhaps I was wrong about you. I read that line 3 times, then threw the letter away. He still didn't get it. The point wasn't that I was as ruthless as them. The point was that I was better than them. I'd used my mother's weapons, truth, documentation, justice, not their weapons of lies and cruelty. I didn't destroy them because I'm an Ashford. I destroyed them because I'm Emily Russo's son. And that's the inheritance that actually matters. Rachel came home from work that evening to find me burning the letter in our fireplace. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, watching the paper curl and blacken. "Everything's perfect." And it was. Not because I had money or status or revenge, but because I had something the Ashfords never understood: peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself, that you honored the people who truly loved you, that you didn't let the cruelty of others define you. They'd invited me to dinner to humiliate me and announce I'd been cut from their inheritance. I'd accepted the invitation and burned their world down. And then I'd walked away and built something better. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just bringing your enemies low, it's rising higher than they ever imagined you could, on your own terms, by your own rules. The Ashford name is mud now, synonymous with fraud and corruption. But the name Russo, the name I legally took back 3 years ago, reclaiming my mother's identity, that name stands for something, for integrity, for justice, for the kind of strength that doesn't need to crush others to feel powerful. I learned that from my mother. And no, inheritance in the world could be worth more than that.